Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. If this review looks similar to a recent review, it's because I'm recording them back to back. And that's because this is another product from FX Audio, also sent through by Hi-Fi College, so a huge thank you to them. And I very nearly bundled all of these together, that being the FiiO K5 Pro, the FX Audio DAC M1, and now this, the FX Audio DAC SQ3. In the end, I decided to separate them because unlike those other two, the SQ3 here is just a DAC. It is also something a bit more, which I'll talk about in a moment, but it doesn't have any kind of amplification. So I'm treating this on its own, but this is going to be a pretty short and sharp review. The SQ3 here retails for just $100 US. So much like the Topping D10S, which I reviewed here some time ago on the channel, wasn't particularly a fan of, this sits in that same kind of realm where it's a very budget DAC, but just like the Topping D10S, it's also a USB bridge, meaning that it can take USB input in and spit out a different digital format, such as optical or coaxial. So come with me now as we explore the DAC SQ3 to see if A, a $100 DAC can be any good, and B, to see if using a cheap USB bridge like this can actually improve the sound of a more expensive DAC. Let's explore. The FX Audio DAC SQ3 uses the ESS 9038Q2M chip. Now that might not mean much to you, and that's totally fine. Don't get too hung up on the chips used, I'm just sharing that for those that are interested. What's more important about this device is that as well as receiving inputs of all different formats all the way up into DSD, it can also convert the input from a USB signal and spit it out through optical or coaxial. That can be really handy if you've got a device that doesn't have a USB input but you want to feed it from your computer, or some might say that you can also improve the sound quality by running USB into a bridge like this, a bridge device being one of those that will take a USB input signal, convert it to optical, coaxial, whatever it might be, and pass it onto a different DAC to do the full decoding. These are also sometimes called a digital to digital converter, or DDC. So some believe that using one of these can improve the sound of your downstream DAC, and that was the other thing I was keen to find out. But let's start with a super quick look at what you get when you buy the DAC SQ3. Front panel is super simple. We've got here a super simple display and a pair of buttons to turn the volume up and down. So that does mean this has got preamp capabilities, which is pretty cool for a DAC of this size and price, but that's really the only functionality you're getting here. If we turn it around and have a look at the back, on the back of the device, things are equally simple. You've got a USB-B input here for the signal. It also carries the power. You'll notice that there's no power connection on here, and that's because it is powered by the USB source. And that may be a bit of a problem, as I'll talk about soon. You've also got optical here, and coaxial, and analog outputs. But in this case, these are all outputs along here. So as I already mentioned, this can work as a pure DAC, or it can convert your incoming USB and spit it out as optical or coaxial. One thing that's quite cool is that it does output DSD through optical and coaxial if that's important. It's limited to DSD64, which is one of the lower levels of DSD, but it's certainly not a bad thing. At least it can do it should you want to. And so with such a simple, basic device, what's most important is talking about how it sounds. And I describe the sound from the SQ3 as fine. It's completely acceptable, completely okay, but it sounds like a $100 DAC, which is to say very limited soundstage and not much depth. If you're only spending $100, I think it's completely acceptable, but I also don't think it's giving you great sound. The $150 FiiO K5 Pro that I covered in my very last review That for an extra $50 gives you both a better DAC and quite a strong built-in headphone amp. I mean strong in terms of quality and also power output. And so I do question a little bit the value of something like this. Of course, if you can't get to $150, then this is great. It gives you a decent DAC that you can plug into your computer, hook up to an external amplifier or a pair of active speakers and enjoy some music. But if you can spend just that little bit more, you're getting quite a lot more from something like the K5 Pro. And in case you're wondering why I've got this other little thing on my desk, this is the E1DA 9038D. This is a $100 dongle device. So it does the exact same thing as this in DAC mode, in the sense that it takes a USB input here in USB-C, and it spits out a 3.5mm stereo signal there, which you can then of course adapt into RCA to go into an external amplifier, or active speakers if you like, but do be aware dongles can be a bit funny with volume and you may end up blowing your speakers and or your eardrums, so do be careful with that. But if you're running it to an external amplifier, you're less likely to have problems. And in that situation, what I can tell you is that for exactly the same price, the 9038D clearly and comfortably outperforms the DAC SQ3. The 9038D produces a significantly better sense of space. It produces better separation of sounds and a better focused image. It's also got more presence and impact in the bass, but it's all very well controlled. This is not a warm or thick DAC by any stretch, but it definitely has a better presence than the DAC SQ3, whilst also giving better quality across the board. And so unless you really don't want a dongle style device, maybe you want something that's a bit more physically large to sit on your desk and be your DAC, unless you want that form factor, I don't really see an argument for buying the SQ3 as a pure DAC. Either spend the same money on a 9038D, or spend a bit more on something like the K5 Pro or the FX Audio DAC M1 that I reviewed. All of those choices are going to give you better sound. And so that begs the question for me, what about using this as a bridge? Maybe its value lies in the fact that I can feed USB in, take coaxial out for example, and send that to a different DAC. And so I fired up the SQ3 via USB from my laptop. I then connected a super coaxial cable, which is to say a good solid but not crazy quality one, and I connected that into the FX Audio DAC M1. The DAC M1 is quite a nice DAC for the price. As I've said before, I've just recently reviewed it, so if you do want to check that out, I'll put a link in this video so you can go and see that. But it's a better DAC, and therefore it was going to show me pretty clearly if using the bridge of the SQ3 could further improve the M1, or if it actually held it back. For this test, I was using the track Version by The Beautiful Girls. It's not a fantastic track to listen to musically, but it's got some interesting textures, a good amount of space, and separation and placement of sounds. The album it comes from, though, is an excellent album that I highly recommend. Back to the sound quality, though, what I heard when I switched from the USB input into the DAC M1 over to the coaxial input coming from the SQ3. So just to clarify, I had my laptop connected via USB to both the SQ3 and the M1. And so the same exact signal was going to this being the DAC M1 and the SQ3. So I could then switch sources on the M1 between coaxial or USB and see which one sounded better. USB coming in meant everything was being handled only by the M1. Coaxial coming in meant that it was going via the SQ3 first. And what I found as I switched between the two was that the sound quality definitely dropped when I used the bridge device in the SQ3. The direct sound via USB straight into the M1 here was better resolved, it was clearer, cleaner, there was a better sense of clarity, and overall tonal accuracy was better just going from the M1. There's a bell sound being used throughout the version track. And what I found was that lost its sense of resonance and clarity when the SQ3 was in the source chain. It was like the SQ3 just made everything sound a little bit hazy. I found that the space in the soundstage was better going straight to the M1 without the SQ3. And that's in terms of both the sense of space, but also the sense of separation and individual imaging on the various instruments. Overall, everything was just smoother, but in a good way, so there was no lost texture or detail or clarity. Everything was just smoother and better resolved from the M1 Direct. And these findings are very, very similar to what I found with the Topping D10S, namely that using it as a bridge actually degrades the signal quality in a lot of cases. There may be some circumstances where you have a really poor USB implementation in the main DAC, and that's where products like these may potentially provide improvements. But I often look at it this way. If you've got a relatively budget device operating as a bridge, it's very unlikely it's going to do a better job of handling a digital signal than a more expensive device. There's more likely to be better USB receiver chips in the more expensive device, and therefore all you're doing by adding this in is creating a weaker link in the chain. So for me, the only real time I can see the SQ3 being of value is if you've got a situation where you absolutely want to connect a USB source like a computer into a DAC of some sort that doesn't have USB. If you've only got optical or you've only got coaxial, then these could be a great solution. But if you're doing that, it's more for convenience and less for sound quality. I did touch on this before, but the final thing I want to say is I think products like this are really hampered by the fact that they're being powered by USB power. USB power is notoriously poor quality, and that seems to be the limiting factor when you're looking at products like this one. So my recommendation to you is that if you're looking for a simple budget USB device, either look at dongles because they do seem to do a better job in this sort of price range, or look for something that's got external power opportunities. Affordable DACs like say a Topping E30 that give you the chance to provide a 5V input from a phone charger, something as basic as that, will almost always outperform something where the power is supplied through the USB connection. So for me, I'm not going to recommend the SQ3 unless you absolutely need the convenience of turning USB into coaxial or optical and you're not so fussed about quality. In all other situations, I think you're better off buying a great little dongle like the 9038D, or spending a little bit more on a DAC like the E30, the FiiO K5 Pro, going up a bit higher to the DAC M1, any of those sorts of options. So apologies to Hi-Fi College that I couldn't say better things about the SQ3. I do like the M1 for the record. I think it's a really nice DAC. The headphone stage, not so much. Check out the review if you want to know more. But for now, I hope you found this review useful. Hopefully I've saved you from wasting some money, or at least confirmed what you thought this was going to be, and it might be the right solution for you in that very specific case. And if I have helped you, I'd love it if you hit subscribe or like. It really helps the channel out. For now though, let me leave you to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.